Hi, I'm Mark from GUBotDev, and this is Tajita. It's been 94 days since the last quad-phase collision, and today we're going to talk to you about the open source community. GUBotDev is an open source organization primarily focused on research, technology, and STEM outreach. We are often posed the question, why do we do what we do?
We hope to make a simple point. When societies believe knowledge is the right of all people who seek it, societies thrive and will develop the means to transmit that knowledge.
The easiest way to keep knowledge from you is to convince you you can't understand it. But you can master science, technology, engineering, and math, and there is an army of STEM warriors making sure you have the access you need to do so. And if you're looking for them, you'll find them in the open source community.
Are there people out there who find it in their best interest to restrict knowledge from you and want you to rely on them for technology? In this video, we will take a trip down the rabbit hole of history and consider the effects of attitude towards knowledge in different societies.
Then we will review the history of the open source community from the hacker culture of the early 70s to modern technology phenomenon like 3D printing and the contemporary DIYer. We will show you that there is a historical mandate for the open source community. It is unnecessary to canonize members of the open source community or vilify those who find it in their best interest to limit knowledge. A grandma covets her secret family recipes because it's part of what makes her special and keeps a family coming back for more.
A bakery might keep its recipe secret because its livelihood is based on the sale of their unique pastries. But there is another model, one of opportunity cost. If you had the recipe, what else could you be doing instead of baking? The latter is the model of an open source company. Neither is good or bad, but let's consider an example that may surprise you.
Alright, guess who said this? And once a thing is put in writing, the composition, whatever it may be, drifts all over the place, getting not only into the hands of those who understand it, but equally of those who have no business with it. It does not know how to address the right people and not address the wrong. Yep, that's Plato in Phaedrus, circa 370 BCE.
Let's assume for a moment one was willing to concede some people aren't worthy of knowledge. Would it be appropriate to withhold knowledge from society at large? Plato certainly thought so. He felt this knowledge belonged in the custodial possession of the aristocracy, but what ramification come about from this attitude?
Plato's definition of the aristocracy was the most fit to rule, but in subsequent times it would become synonymous with hereditary rule and nobility. Polybius wrote his histories nearly 400 years after Plato's writings. He observed historical patterns of bloody revolutions, and Polybius stated that a tyrannical monarch would be overthrown by the aristocracy, which would rule with the public good in mind. However, the sons of these men, having a privileged life and having not experienced the horror of tyranny, tended to become corrupt. And when these sons inherited their father's rule, the aristocracy would deteriorate into an oligarchy, or a small ruling body that exercises control for corrupt and selfish purposes.
This is the ultimate Platonic irony. History has shown that Plato's attitude toward knowledge ensured that knowledge would find itself in the custodial possession of those who are not worthy of it, and potentially kept from those who are. Perhaps Plato should have taken his own advice. He wrote, "No intelligent man would ever be so bold as to put into language those things which his reason has contemplated, especially not into a form that is unalterable." But he did, and will let history be his judge.
The Platonic and Aristotelian traditions would live on in the societies and thinkers that came after. Christian thinker Aquinas, Jewish thinker Maimonides, and Islamic thinker Averroes all followed a Neoplatonian Aristotelian tradition and believed that knowledge should be limited. These thinkers felt that truth and knowledge must be transmitted to the common person through parables and tradition, but to expose them to unfettered knowledge and science would subvert their faith and confuse them. Maimonides often compared the average person to an infant. Aquinas felt that theological truth would confuse the uneducated and be a source of ridicule by the unbelievers. Averroes felt that only those with superior natures should read philosophical books.
Plato held out the possibility that women could be part of the aristocracy, but Aristotle did not, and this tradition of excluding women from the group of people worthy of knowledge had a long legacy. Maimonides often placed women in a group with children, the stupid, and the ignorant. Aquinas claimed that men had more noble vital action that women lacked, and that was intellectual operation. Averroes notably departed from many of the disparaging attitude toward women found in the Aristotelian tradition. He does, however, fall short of modern attitudes of gender equality. The line of misogynistic thinkers that followed, like Hegel and Spinoza, is so long that it's not worth our time to recount them here.
These thinkers give us a good idea of the attitudes towards knowledge in the common person. But what was the effect of these attitudes on society? In the 5th century, the Roman Empire dissolved. Monasteries became the only source of education, even that of the literate professionals necessary for civil administration or government. Education became primarily focused on virtues such as prudence, temperance, and sacrifice. By the 8th century, little to no education was available to the common person, and the Western world had descended into the Dark Ages and would remain so until and beyond the writings of Aquinas.
Yet at the same time, the Arab world was moving in the opposite direction, producing the first fully literate society. Alfred von Kremer wrote, "The Arabs made learning accessible to all. It ceased to be the privilege of only one class, initiating that blossoming of mental activity that burst the chain of fanaticism, superstition, and despotism." Jonathan Bloom's book, Paper Before Print, makes a compelling argument that the production of a cheap paper alternative to the expensive papyrus and parchment was the key factor in the mental blossoming. Bloom stated, "Writing came to play a crucial and pervasive role in virtually every aspect of life."
While the Western world descended into darkness, the Arab world rose to become the most technologically advanced society the world had ever seen, and the center of science, technology, engineering, and math, as well as art, culture, and literature. The Arab world put forth a culture where learning was accessible to all, and the Arab society responded by making the means to provide that access. This is an important distinction. Mark Kurlansky, in his book Paper, Paging Through History, describes the technology fallacy. He asserts that technology does not change society, but society develops technology to address the changes that are taking place within it.
Between the 6th and 8th century, Irish monks began to infuse Europe with education that eventually included science, nature study, math, and astronomy. However, attitudes toward knowledge had not changed, which is evident by Aquinas' writings in the 13th century. However, in the 14th century, the plague decimated Europe. The plague's devastation seems to mark a significant change in attitude, which is apparent in the writings of the reformers and humanists that followed. Martin Luther believed institutions of learning should be available to all, and education should be available to girls as well as boys. He emphasized literacy, if only to read the scripture. Although humanist thinkers like Erasmus disagreed with Luther on several accounts, on this they agreed. A literate society should be the goal. Thomas More educated his daughters in the same manner as he educated his sons, and in his novel Utopia he states that men and women are educated alike in his idea of a perfect society. Juan Luis Vives was the first humanist thinker to assert the importance of popular education and touted the positive impact of educating laity and the poor on the society at large.
The plague had one other major effect. And Charles Van Doren, in his book History of Knowledge, describes that plague survivors not only inherited wealth and land, they inherited clothes and cloth goods. And the huge supply of excess cloth fueled the rag paper industry, and by 1450 a huge cheap supply of it flooded Europe. While there certainly was an attitude that the common person was unworthy of knowledge prior to the 14th century, there was also a sense that knowledge must be preserved, and since books were handwritten and paper so expensive, books were viewed as treasures that must be maintained by worthy custodians. The cheap production of paper and the development of printing technology put an end to this argument for limiting knowledge. Europe rose to become the center of science and technology, art and culture as the Renaissance erupted from the 14th to the 17th century.
When societies believe knowledge and learning is the right of all, and believe that the common person is capable of learning, those societies thrive. Those societies will develop the means to transmit knowledge, and there will be those who will make it their charge to fuel that transmission. Now, let's consider the history of the open source in this context. In our modern times, there are definitely those who would benefit from limiting knowledge. We do not need to think of them as evil or oppressive, but simply understand that it is more profitable if the common person has to rely on them for technology and expertise.
If you believe that technology and the STEM disciplines are too complicated for you to understand, you are at their mercy. And if you believe that technology is expensive and hard to produce, you will pay more for it.
The fact is, the STEM disciplines have never been more accessible and easier to acquire, and technology has never been cheaper. This is because of the open source community.
This community is a meritocracy, simultaneously leveraged to push technology forward and bring it into the reach of the common person. It is a force juxtaposed to attempts to restrict knowledge.
The history of the open source community shares many similarities to the changes in attitudes toward knowledge seen prior to historical periods of enlightenment. The open source movement has deep roots going back to the 1970s. Many of its philosophical traditions come from the hacker culture of the late 60s and 70s. As enumerated by Stephen Levy in his book Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution, the hacker ethic has the following tenets.
1. Access to computers or anything about how the world works should be unlimited and total.
2. All information should be free.
3. Hackers should be judged by their hacking, not bogus criteria such as degrees, age, race, or position.
4. You can create beautiful art and beauty on a computer.
And 5. Computers can change your life for the better. In 1983, Richard Stallman founded the free software movement, launching the GNU project. Stallman and his colleagues felt that since they had purchased their computers, they should be able to alter its code. Computer operating systems were unreadable and could not be accessed or modified, so they set out to write their own operating system. Their source code would be available to everyone for them to review, modify, and redistribute.
In 1998, Netscape released the source code for the Netscape Communicator, and Eric Raymond and Bruce Perens founded the Open Source Initiative. Open source software, among other tenets, must be freely distributed with accessible source code, must allow derived works, must not discriminate against persons, groups, or fields of domain, must not restrict other software, and must be technology neutral.
Bruce Perens also launched the Open Hardware Certification Program. Open hardware provides a new vector for companies and individuals to produce and distribute physical products with open designs that can be replicated and modified by anyone. Arduino emerged from this open hardware movement, and their microcontrollers have evolved to play a pivotal role in much modern technology such as 3D printers, hobby CNCs, and the flight controllers for drones.
While the movement is a rebuke of the abusive use of the patent office and protected intellectual property that the community believes should be in the public domain, it does provide a new vector for companies. Lulzbot is an open-source 3D printer company that publishes its designs, software, and even a bill of materials and a list of its suppliers. Lulzbot is largely considered to produce the best printers on the market and is GeoBota's printer of choice. Many companies like Flight Test have sprouted from popular YouTube channels. Open source companies have a few things in common. They tend to hold customer trust as one of their most valuable commodities, and they tend to support a larger community that rewards them with patronage and assistance in developing their product line.
In 2009, Jordi Manas, along with Chris Anderson, released Ardupilot 1.0, a program that ran on an Arduino Mega. Manas and Anderson founded 3D Robotics and created the DIY Drones Forum, which fostered a large community of developers. With the help of their army of developers, Ardupilot became a true autopilot, bringing truly autonomous aircraft into the reach of the hobbyist.
Out of this community has risen many collaborative projects that have brought technology to the masses. For instance, the RepRap project, founded by Dr. Adrian Bauer, created the first low-cost filament-fed 3D printer, bringing rapid prototyping in the reach of the common person.
Around 2010, an open-source developer known as Alex in Paris, all one word, successfully combined a Nintendo Wii controller and an Arduino board to create the open-source multi-Wii, multi-rotor flight controller. Today, nearly all racing drone flight controllers have evolved from the multi-Wii design and software.
The open source repertoire also includes a collection of open source computer-aided design programs. An important effect of these programs is the pressure they have placed on high-priced CAD software companies, most of which now provide free versions such as SketchUp Make and Autodesk Fusion 360.
The open source community has given birth to a new age. An age where high technology is not the exclusive domain of multi-million-dollar companies. This is an age where the dynamics of power and influence are changing. In this age, hacking is the new Second Amendment. It's a skill you can legally acquire, governments are afraid of it, and everyone fears it'll fall into the wrong hands. This is an age where the future is not one where the masses rely on the few to provide their technology, but one that is driven forward by the constant innovation coming from every household and every mind. Our rag paper is YouTube and GitHub.
We live in a world with many problems and few solutions. No one knows better how to solve a problem than those who have it. The STEM disciplines and technology provide problem-solving tools and techniques. The open source community provides access to knowledge and education, flattens steep learning curves, and provides downward pressure on the high cost of technology.
Profiteering, foreign manufacturing, slave labor, animal cruelty. We live in a time when it is hard to trust, and everything we do seems to hurt someone. But sharing knowledge and educating people is simply good, and that's why we do it. I'm Mark from GUBotDev, and that's Tajita, reminding you to support your open source community today.
Click on an ad in your favorite video.
Donate to your favorite contributor.
Upload a video of your own and teach us what you know.
And remember, in the open source, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. Now go make something.